Many of you know that I grew up in a church, and it was not my choice to be a pastor. I saw my dad pastoring in a little church and a lot of challenges, and I thought, that just seems like way too much hard work. And I really didn't want to do that. I wanted to follow my grandfather's footsteps, who was an architect and a designer. But in high school, God changed my heart through a teen conference that I went to. And I saw a whole bunch of students that were serious and excited about their faith and following Jesus. And a few events happened shortly after that that really shaped the life of our church. I came back from that event. I was really excited about sharing my faith, about sharing the gospel. I was in a local park and I was playing basketball. I met some guys. I said, hey, why don't you come to church with me? And they actually did. They showed up. And I can see it as if I was sitting there today, sitting on the back row, and these guys came in. I was so excited for them to come. And in those days, we used these books called hymnals, which had our songs in them that we would sing out of. And there was Bibles, and they were in the rack in front of us. And they were just told to grab a hymnal, and they didn't know which one was the hymnal, and they grabbed the wrong one, and they were trying to find their place. And then when they figured out, they switched to the other one, and they couldn't quite find where they had to go. And they were told, they started preaching from the Bible, and they didn't know where to go, and they just closed the book and put it on the rack and sat there, and they never came back. And one of the things that God burned into my heart is exactly that passage that Nick shared earlier, and that's this passage we've been reading over and over again. It says, I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it's the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and then to the Greek. I wanted to be in a church that made the gospel understandable so anybody could embrace it and grab it, and it could become theirs. A couple years later, I was in a church setting where there was a vote for a guy in leadership. And because I worked with this guy, I knew what his life was in church and outside of church. And he was being put in a role of leadership. And because of that, I couldn't vote for the guy. And I realized as a young college student how difficult it was to say, I don't think that should happen, when everybody around me was saying it should happen. Because what I'd seen happen is I saw someone who gave their life to Jesus and then they stopped growing. And I thought, that doesn't seem to match what the scriptures seem to say. Paul says this, he says, my dear children, for whom I am in the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. Paul had this deep longing for people to become like Jesus Christ, for him to be formed in them, for them to become more like him. And he said, I want this to happen not only now, but till the day that you leave this earth. Jesus said, or Paul said, being confident of this very one thing, that he who began a good work will carry it on in you until completion, the day when you actually meet Jesus. And the second thing I wanted to see happen was I wanted to be a part of a church that helped people grow up in their faith for as long as they were here on this earth. I went away to college. I met my wife there. My senior year, I was challenged to consider church planting. Much to her chagrin, she thought she was just going to be a happy, content pastor's wife. That never happened. Sorry, dear. But content, yes, but not a lot of challenges there. But went on an internship in grad school in a place in Berks County. But before I went on that internship, I went to a church. My wife and I were a part of a church. And in this church, we saw people that were willing to help other people understand the gospel in a way that was different. Understand the gospel that they could accept, and it would change their lives. And I had the great opportunity this past week just to talk to that pastor, Mark, who's a good friend of mine, and just thank him for his role in what our church has become today. And what that church focused on, and what we've said was going to be important after people give their lives and continue to grow up to be more like Jesus for the rest of their life, Matthew 28, 19 and 20, where Jesus commands us to go and make disciples. He doesn't just say, come to church. He doesn't just say, invite people to church. He said, I want you to go, and I want you to invite people not only follow me, but to be like Jesus, to imitate Jesus. And what did he want them to imitate? He wanted them to imitate these two things: to love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love their neighbor as themselves. And that summer that I finished my internship, the summer of 91, I got to spend some time praying and asking God and saying, if I could plant a church and if the church would happen, what would that church be like? And I wanted it to be a church that would have those two components: introduce people to Jesus and help them know how to love and follow Jesus for the rest of their lives. Our sending church allowed us to do that. It was High Point Baptist Chapel in Geigertown, PA. Traditional Baptist church, but gave us the freedom to be a little bit different. So we began that fall to make phone calls. One of the individuals on the video, Julie, was involved in making those phone calls. We did surveys. We would find any way to meet people that we could. I joined the local junior chamber of commerce. I went to the rec center. There was in the newspaper listings of people that had new babies, and I drug my wife out to give gifts to all these people. And one of those individuals is sitting right here in the front row because of that, and God changed their lives. But we did anything we could to find people that were interested in a new church. Anything we could. And we eventually got a group of people, started meeting in our home, our first small group. And after those people started meeting in our home, then we did that for about 8 months, and we said, we should start having a church service. And so we put flyers together, we sent out brochures, we put ads in the newspaper like the one you'll see out there on the counter. I should have been a prophet. One of my ads said, don't wear your mask to church. I should have been a prophet. Should have been a prophet. But before we were supposed to meet, our first Sunday, we didn't have a place. We didn't have a place. We had all the advertisements out, everything going out. We were ready to launch. We had bought equipment. We didn't have a place. And the first lesson that I've learned for these 30 years is God would be faithful and always meet our needs. God was going to be faithful and always meet our needs. 4 weeks before our first service, the local JCs that I was a part of, they had a meeting in a different location than they normally met. And it was in a basement room of a hotel that now is the Comfort Inn, used to be the Holiday Inn. I didn't know that hotel had a basement room. And we went there. As soon as I walked in the doors, I was like, this is where our church is going to meet. And I went up and talked to the owner of the hotel. I said, does anybody use this on Sunday morning? He's like, are you kidding? Nobody uses this on Sunday morning. I said, can we rent it? He said, sure. I said, can we rent a couple hotel rooms right up this top of the stairs? And would you empty those rooms out and we could put our kids' stuff? And he said, absolutely. And that's where our church first began in March 27th, 1992. The first service, about 100 people squeezed in. Some just wanted to check us out, and about 30 people stayed. And I thought we would be there for a number of years, and that would be our home. But God had other plans for us, and he provided for us this place called the 5 Pointville Independent Bible Church. That was actually the name. The church was folding. They were on their way down. We were starting to grow and looking for a space. And so that's where we moved in. And that really began the early years. And the question in the early years for any church, any organization, any business is, will it survive? Will it survive? Would anybody come? I think my wife lived with this fear for many, many years that we would come to church and nobody would be there and it would just be the two of us. By God's grace, that didn't happen. But I don't know if you know the statistics. 90% of business startups within the first 10 years fail. It's a pretty high number. Pretty high number, and it's no different for churches. But more people kept coming. I'm in this little quaint country church that looked like something on a postcard. And eventually the room continued to fill up with even some of you who are here this morning. We ran out of space for our kids that we had downstairs in the basement. We met in the fire hall next door. We met out in the field in a tent during the summer. We met down the street at Mel and Lillian Weinhold's house. And we were running out of space, but we didn't know where to go because the schools wouldn't rent us any space for more than 4 weeks. Again, I didn't know where to go. One Sunday, I was driving home from church in 5 Pointville, and I drove past this Mennonite school, Gaiman's Mennonite School, and I remembered a couple years ago, a guy said to me, I think your church is going to meet at Gaiman's Mennonite School. I didn't know what he was talking about. I was like, it's a school. The schools won't rent to us. They don't have an auditorium. Why would we meet there? But as I was driving home that day, that thought flashed into my mind, and I drove in the parking lot, I drove around the back, and I saw this big steel building. I thought, I wonder if that's a gym. I went in and met the principal, Mel Weaver, and that began an 17 and a half year relationship. I remember when we moved in our first Sunday that Mel and Greg Dobb helped us plan that. We moved in 1998, February of 1998. It felt like we moved into a mansion, is what it felt like. From that little tiny chapel into the gym at Gaiman's Mennonite School, it felt like we moved into a mansion. But now we had this dilemma of how we were going to get our stuff into the school because they had school and they didn't have any extra storage. Well, God provided this amazing blue truck that Gary Musselman retrofitted with all kinds of unique contraptions inside that truck. He actually converted the truck in such a way that there were bars that would hold the carpet rolls, it would unroll on the carpet, that were exactly about 5 feet tall. And so every guy that helped do setup had a gash in his head from running into those brackets inside the truck. But Gary also came up with a way to, and you can see everybody helped with setup. He came up with a way to help us convert carts, and we built these carts. I think he went to the plant in Michigan where they built these, and he somehow memorized the drawings or something. I don't know what he did, but he came up with all these carts. And we loaded and unloaded all of our stuff at Gaiman's for 17 and a half years. Everybody who was in a small group helped out with setup and teardown. Everybody. Every student helped out with setup and teardown. I calculated we set up and tore down that space 875 times. We were out of our minds. We were just crazy. I don't know what we were thinking. That's a lot. That's a lot. All this sound and lighting, it's remarkable. Remarkable. In 1999, we hired our first staff. Eventually, that was Mike Pierce, who you heard from, and Ben Zentner. They were part-time and then eventually full-time. Our rent was $150 a week, and I don't think they raised that for about a decade. In 2004, we launched a second service, no rent increase, when we asked them if we could stay a little bit longer. We asked them to put a shed on the property, which they gave us permission to do. We asked them if we could put sound, lighting, technology in the gym and in the classrooms in a Mennonite school that was built in the 50s. Who would imagine that that would take place? But they never told us no, mostly because we paid for it all. When we first met there was these metal folding chairs that the seats were bent at an angle like this, and you had to brace your feet. If you couldn't wear dress shoes, you'd slide out and be on your butt. You had to wear rubber-soled shoes. So we bought new chairs. We put air conditioning. We didn't have air conditioning in this gym for many, many years. Gary, again, rigged up some system to try to cool that space down all summer long. But we didn't have any way to keep it cool, and eventually we were able to put air conditioning in. Once a year, we went off-site, and we went to all different kinds of locations. You name it in this area, we have rented it, and we have met there for some kind of function, because we were a church without a home. We met there for anniversary celebrations like this. We met there for church meals. We met there for all different kinds of fun events. Our church continued to grow, and as we continued to grow and move into all different kinds of spaces, the gym at Gaiman's began to fill up more and more. We started to look for ways to reach out in our community. And so we did all kinds of events, things like Just for Kicks, which was a soccer clinic that we did for many, many years in our community that allowed us to reach into the lives of the families in our communities. As a result of that, we had kids come to Christ and parents come to Christ, and we needed a place to baptize people. We didn't have a baptistry. Where were we going to go? Well, the neighbor across the street had a pool, and we said, "Can we use your pool?" And they said, "Sure." And so Sunday after church on a summer afternoon, we would walk across the street. We would take our shoes and socks off, climb in the pool, and baptize many, many, many people while we were there at Gaiman's Mennonite School. And the lesson I think that God taught us that time was that God's plan for CCC was to lead people who are searching to Jesus, and that they would meet Jesus, and that Jesus would change their lives. As our church was continuing to grow, by now we were at 2 services. We're slowly starting to fill up Gaiman's. I had big dreams about what God was going to do. 2008, 2009, we rolled out this big plan of what we thought the future was going to hold. I remember a conversation I had with one of our current elders. He said to me, "John, that's never going to happen." I'm like, "Thank you for your positive encouragement." But we weren't ready. We weren't ready. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. You see, there was a lot of work that God had to do in me. Our church had this upward climb and to the right for nearly 15 years, and then it hit the brakes. What I didn't know is the work that God needed to do in me. I wanted people to continue to grow, but I didn't know that God needed to do something deeper inside of me. I wanted to love God with all of my mind, but I didn't know what it meant to love God with my heart and with my soul. I began this journey to experience emotional health and then a connection with spiritual health. I began to wrestle with, is there a connection between the two of them? That if God wants me to love Him with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, that means every single part of me. And that meant that God was going to have to transform things in me that I didn't even know He needed to change. In 2012, our leadership decided we couldn't be at Gaiman's forever. We didn't want to be at Gaiman's forever. Let me clarify that. And we began to search for property. We had found 2 pieces of property, one in Bowmansville, one on 897. We thought we were going to go towards the one in Bowmansville, and at the last minute, one of our guys, I can't remember exactly who it was, said, I think we should check on that other property. We found the owner. We talked to the owner. He was in a nursing home, and then he died. And then we're like, now what do we do? Eventually, we found the heirs, and we bought this piece of property on 897. We tore down 7 buildings, sold everything we could make a buck off to our Mennonite neighbors, dug a big hole, and burned the rest of them. We put a big sign there, future home of CCC. We did prayer walks, we raised money, promotional video, capital campaign, but we still only had half of the money that we needed to build on this piece of property. We didn't know what to do. May of 2014, Randy, who was overseeing our facility team at that time, got a call from a realtor, and Randy said, John, I think we should look at this piece of property. I was like, Randy, are you sure? Because Randy said to me 2 years earlier, he said, John, we've got to stop looking at every other option. We need to stay the course. This is what we need to do. I was like, are you sure? He said, I think we should. It was the first time we ever had anybody tell us about a church building that was available since we moved into Five Pointville. So we went and looked it over, took the staff, took the elders, explained it to the members, and then I went on a sabbatical. It was 8 years ago this summer. Matt Armbruster led our elder team. Randy led our facility team along with Johnny and Tim, and we made a decision. I signed the papers, and we got the keys to the building 1 week before I returned from my sabbatical. And that began a very remarkable 9-month journey. Many of you are a part of that. Every Tuesday, every Saturday. This is some pictures of our building before we moved into it. Cleaning it, demoing it, tearing down walls. We remodeled over 75% of the building during those 9 months. It was an exciting day when we had our first service here in June of 2015. God had once again provided the right place for us at the right time. We had a great celebration as we moved in, and we actually started meeting over in the gym because this space we chose not to finish. We spent the next 12 months renovating the sanctuary, and God decided it was time for us to start growing again. Remember I told you we grew for 15 years, and then God kind of said hit pause because of stuff he needed to do in me and in our leadership, and God decided in 2015 it was time for us to start growing again. We needed more space, so we added parking. We renovated the house to add offices. We added more staff. Alicia and Roddy, along with our admin staff, Kelsey, Olivia, and Carrie, and CCC was busting at the seams. What happened next is really hard to understand because tragedy struck as our worship director, Johnny, was hit by a car on a snowy Sunday, the Sunday the Eagles won the Super Bowl. We waited and prayed, and God spared his life, but he wasn't able to resume leading here at CCC. Why did God allow this? What was God doing? How was God going to come through? Volunteers stepped up and led for nearly a year. During that time, we actually added a third service, and that service was beginning to fill up. And as a staff, we were feeling overwhelmed. We weren't sure how we were going to sustain all that was happening. And then COVID hit, and everything was shut down. And we wondered, what would we do? We weren't online. We somehow figured out how to create videos that were really bad initially. But thank you for watching them, for those of you that suffered through them. We learned every single week. I'm no longer purple, although I think my hair kind of looks a little purple at times, they tell me. But after 3.5 months, we said, you know what? I think we can go outside. And we did. And God provided this place, the Reinhold's Fairground, where we had actually met years before for our soccer clinic for our services. We launched an online service, eventually came back inside last October. We added new staff, Matt, Sophia, Jeremy, Nicole, and Scott. And we're slowly growing to the point that last week our in-person attendance and our online attendance was the same as it was at our highest average pre-COVID. You say, what are we going to do when this space fills up? We don't really know. But one thing we do know is God is going to be faithful, and God is going to provide exactly what we need when we need it. And that's one of the lessons that I learned through this time, and that I believe God will continue to provide for us, that God has a plan to sustain us, and all of his plans are to use us. But the first one is that God would be faithful, and he always met our needs. God's met our needs for facility, for staff, for finances, for lives being changed and transformed. Whether it was a place to meet, whether it was adding more services, whether it was financial resources, God always seems to show up and come through. He doesn't give us a lot of extra, and He sometimes doesn't give us a lot of lead time, but He keeps our faith growing by meeting our needs. Second of all, God's plan for CCC is to lead people who are searching to Jesus, and that He will save them and transform them. Lots of people have given their lives to Jesus. Lots of people have been baptized. If you've never been to a baptism service, I hope you come back next Sunday, because we're going to have a baptism service and we're going to hear more stories of people whose lives God has changed. Lots of people come and say, I need something more, I want something more, and they don't know what it is. They don't know if it's Jesus, but they want something more. They say, I don't want to be the way I am, can you help me? They say, I want to grow up in my faith and I want to deepen my faith. Can you walk with me? Some are searching for Jesus. Some are searching for someone to be with them in their struggles. And some are searching to deepen their faith. And all of this happens at CCC in community. And lastly, God had a plan to sustain us, and He has a plan to use us. You know, in the early days in our church, we wondered, is our church going to make it? And we seemed to. Our church grew, we ran out of space. We wondered where we were going to go, and then we wondered, how were we going to pay for it? And today we sit on a property that's valued at somewhere in the ballpark of maybe $3 million with less than $350,000 as a mortgage. God did all of that. All of that. We had a crisis a few years ago, as I shared, and we wondered how we would survive, and we did. And then when COVID hit, and we faced all kinds of challenges, we walked through this space when we weren't meeting, and we wondered again, are we going to make it, God? And God decided we were. And He's been faithful now, then, and He will be faithful now. And He gives us an anchor of His self, His truth, His word, and one another to hold on to tightly.